What is that, young man? You want to book on archaeology? Don't you know the Dewey Decimal System? Remember these stupid glasses? Because then all I can see is this big blue thing. Looks like some Cronenberg nightmare right over my eyes. 2, 3, 4. Beep, 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 bop, bop, bop. Hey. Do, 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 do. Dee, 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 da, dee, da, da. You knew that was coming. All right. Well, I am now officially 1 month behind. Like a bunch of books that I bought this week, I just read this past week over the course of a few days. Like normally I like to just sit and read, but lately for whatever reason when I've had a whole day, I don't get but a couple hours in before I just kind of lose interest. It happens sometimes, you know. But since I didn't get as much reading in on Sunday as I'd hoped, I said, well, Thanksgiving is it. I've long celebrated Thanksgiving alone. I prefer it that way, to be honest with you. Which, I find people refuse to believe that for some reason. I don't know. When I was in my 20s and I worked in a 7-Eleven, I would often volunteer to work holidays just to have an excuse to not have to go to my family's house. And then when I was in my 30s and I worked in this warehouse, that was Thanksgiving was the last day off before our busiest season, where we'd have to work 6 days a week and have to work 12-hour days sometimes and stuff like that. So then I was like, well, Thanksgiving is mine because it's my last day off and I want to enjoy it. And now I just do it. I think last year me and my lady friend at the time went to a friend of ours' house for Friendsgiving, and that's always nice. But I gotta tell you, after the quarantine really learned me. I learned a lot about myself. Mostly, I would rather not. So it was fun and I had a good time. But I was also like, after an hour and a half or so, I'm like, all right, I gotta get the fuck out of here. So tomorrow, I'm really gonna do my best to read all of these goddamn funny books. Beginning with these here. First up, Yoda #1. Hooray! Look, he's got his lightsabers and everything. I was talking the other day, just this past week, about the prequels, the Star Wars prequels, and, any Star Wars fan, especially my age, is going to have some misgivings with the prequels, to say the very least. And they're far from perfect movies. In fact, they're not even very good, but I like them. First of all, I like anything Star Wars. I don't watch everything Star Wars. I've tried watching, for whatever reason, I'll do this every now and again, I tried watching some of the kids' cartoons that they have on Disney+. Because sometimes kids' cartoons are like hidden treasures, they end up being really good. Like, I accidentally saw Ren and Stimpy the day it aired, and I was 15, and I said, this is the best thing I've ever seen in my life. It was a little kids' show. Where the hell was I going with that? Oh, the prequels. Yeah, so I tried to watch some of the Star Wars kids cartoons. It didn't really do it for me. That's fine. There's a million. I mean, that's the greatest thing about, one of the only good things about living in this time, is that I can remember a time when all we had was the original trilogy. A guy at my dad's work gave him he taped it off TV, the first Ewok adventure film, and then that was it. That was all I had extra. I had the toys and stuff, but no media, no more. If I caught the Mark Hamill episode of The Muppet Show on TV, it was a good day. That's always true. So yeah, now it's an embarrassment, quite literally, of Star Wars media, and so it's like I don't know where these assholes get the nerve to complain about it. Yeah. People are assholes, I guess. But one of the, I think, unassailable things about the Star Wars prequels is we finally see Yoda kick ass and take names. I mean, it never even occurred to me before Attack of the Clones that he was an actual warrior. Because, the big reveal of him in Empire is like, oh, how can this scrawny little thing be a Jedi Master? And then he lifts an X-Wing out of Dagobah Swamp, and it's like, oh, that's very impressive, obviously, but we never really see Yoda do anything else. So to think that it took, 20 plus years for them to go, hey, we should have him fight Christopher Lee for some reason. No complaints here. Yeah, it was great, dude. Personally, and this is going to sound extremely crazy, Phantom Menace is my favorite of those movies, and I will fight people on that. Not because I feel that strongly about it, it's because I don't like people, and I want an excuse to punch them. You don't like the pod race? Let's see what else I got this week. Also this week, I meant to say this too, that Yoda is... It's written by Cavan Scott, who I'm not very familiar with, and drawn by Nico Leone, who I have read some stuff by, and he is good. And it looks like it's going to be an ongoing series, or at least it's not going to be just like a 4-issue thing that's over with. Phil Noto cover, like most Star Wars covers. And, yeah, it's he's got such a long backstory that very, very little has been filled in, the prequels. And then I imagine he was in the Clone Wars cartoon. Although I never really watched much of that. I saw one of the movies of that in the theater in 2008, just, again, for yucks, just because it was a Star Wars thing. Yeah, it wasn't that great. I prefer the Tartakovsky Clone Wars, but that's a whole nother rant. So yeah, I'm excited for it. I'm also excited for this year's funny book, Once Upon a Time at the End of the World, #1. It's written by the great Jason Aaron, who's wrapping up his run on the Avengers over at the Marvel Comics Group, and he's been at Marvel, large and in charge at Marvel, for I want to say at least 15 years now, maybe a little less. I think 15 years was when Scalped was out, and that was what really made him in the industry. But that was a Vertigo book, that was on DC. But it wasn't long after Scalped, it might have even been before Scalped wrapped up, that he started writing for Marvel. And then I remember, this must have been around 2010 or so, I want to say. I saw him at a panel, or he wasn't actually at the panel at Comic-Con, but they had a video of him announcing that he was going to be writing the Hulk, and I was like, oh, Jason Aaron's definitely like a writer at Marvel, and I couldn't be more thrilled, because he had The Other Side and Scalped at Vertigo, and I love those comics, and I've loved all of his Marvel stuff. And it's not like he hasn't done indies here and there during his career at Marvel. He did Southern Bastards with Jason Latour, which was woefully never finished, and I have a feeling it won't be. And gosh, I want to say there's at least one more, but I'm hard pressed. Oh, him and Latour and Ivan Brandon did a book called Sea of Stars, but I didn't, or maybe that was Hopeless and Latour. I could have swore Jason Aaron's name was on that too. Regardless, I feel like since he's been at Marvel for such a while now, and since he's written pretty much all the big ones, except for FF maybe. He's written X-Men, he's written the Hulk, he's written Avengers now for a few years. What other? I guess he hasn't written Iron Man. He did write Thor, though. He wrote the last Thor movie, basically. Or he created Gore the God Butcher, who was the main villain in the last movie. That was about as much as that movie had in common with Jason Aaron's run, was that character. So this is a love story during the apocalypse. I don't know much more about it than that. I purposefully don't want to know. All I had to be told was it was Jason Aaron. Alexander Tefenki is drawing it. I'm not familiar with this artist, and also Lee Lowridge is a colorist who's very good. Nick Dragata's name is on here too. Nick Dragata is a very good artist. He drew East of West with Jonathan Hickman. I don't know what he's going to be doing here. Maybe a backup. Maybe he's inking. I don't know. But I mean, it's smart to put his name on the cover, because somebody like me will be like, oh, okay, well, that's more reason to buy it. And then finally this week, Doctor Strange Fall Sunrise #1 from the Marvel Comics Group. I love when they bring this old shit back. This was the banner that was across the top of every Marvel comic. What year was that? I want to say 79. I don't know. I don't remember exactly. Might have even been 80 into the early 80s. But obviously that's a nostalgia thing. This is, for one thing, it does seem like lately, even though they killed Doctor Strange, they've been, using him a lot. And I think it must have been some kind of concession to the suits at Disney, because Doctor Strange is still a very live property for them. You know, that was the other one of the other Marvel movies to come out this year, and so they can't really have him dead. And that's fine. I mean, he is every time they kill somebody, it's always, especially for guys like me, it's always assured that they will be back. It might be years. Wolverine was dead for years. Jean Grey was dead for years. Doctor Strange has only been dead for a short time, but they're already kind of like, it looks like they're going to bring him back pretty soon. This, though, is something I believe that's hence the dated cover scheme. It takes place in the past. It's by Tradd Moore and Heather Moore. Tradd Moore is, I assume, the writer and artist, like penciler, and I think Heather Moore is his wife, who might be colors. I don't know. Like I said, I don't want to know anything. Although I have noticed that that's usually how it is. When you have a husband and wife creative team, well, there's three that I can think of off the top of my head. You got the Moores, you have the Allreds, and then you have Michael and Laura Allred, and then you have Evan Dorkin and Sarah Dyer, who have been a couple and a creative team for a better part of 30 years now. As have the Allreds, if I'm not mistaken. Tradd Moore has not done a ton lately. I think he's one of these guys that kind of takes a while. He cut his teeth on a book called Luther Strode, The Legend of Luther Strode, I believe was the first one. There were 3 Luther Strode miniseries. There were 6 issues each. It was like a realistic take on a kid getting superpowers, like what kind of like Kick-Ass, but he wasn't like a comic book nerd. He was just like a normal kid who gets super strength or something to that effect. It was really good. It's been a while since I don't remember all the ins and outs, but it was great. And it was also written by Justin Jordan, whose name I have not seen. He was hot shit for a while there too. It seemed like, anyway. He did a book called Spread, which is really good. He's written a bunch of other things, but I don't see his name around much these days. When Tradd Moore works these days for comics, it seems like it's Marvel stuff that he's doing. The last thing he did was a book called Silver Surfer Black, which was like an out-of-continuity Silver Surfer story. Most Silver Surfer miniseries, for whatever reason, are not in continuity. But that's important only to dorks like me. But yeah, this is a very Tradd Moore cover. He's got a kind of, what's the word I want? Not surreal. Surreal's not bad. I mean, he's not like a representation. He's not like Alex Ross or somebody. But it's fun. And this is an incredible cover, frankly. And I'm excited. I really like, and especially because in the current, I don't want to give anything away, but in the current Doctor Strange series, which is just called Strange, Clea, his ex-wife, his longtime love interest, Clea, who is the daughter of Dormammu, the Dread Dormammu, Lord of the Dark Dimension, who is Doctor Strange's arch nemesis. She has become the Sorcerer Supreme of this realm, and she's, while doing her Sorcerer Supreme duties, is also working to bring Stephen back. And so having her in the book again and having that dynamic present again, I really want to go back and read a lot of this. I have a ton of it in this stack of books here. Who knows when I mean, it's also on the app if I wanted to just read that. But I have most of the 70s series. I even have Doctor Strange number 1, which I got like in 2015. And then I have most of the 80s and into the 90s series. Which is weird is because when I was a kid, I didn't really read Doctor Strange that much. I don't know, for whatever reason, he just wasn't around a whole lot. There was that one title, and I had a couple issues, because back, especially in the late 80s, I would buy everything. At least one. I wanted to have like one of every title. Because it made my list longer. Books that I had. Now I don't really have that worry so much, My list is plenty long. That's what. All right. Picks of last week. First up, we had Rogue State number 1. Let me finish. And to conclude, right. It was pretty good. It's the not too distant future. Dystopia has has taken over the land. That's not the word. In the not too distant future, dystopia has set in, and so there are militias just policing the streets. And this takes place in San Francisco, obviously, where that sort of thing doesn't fly. It was good, and the art was good, and it was fun, but I don't know that I need the rest of it. I can trade weight on it. That's what I get for buying things just because my boss says I should. This was very fun. This is Murder World Avengers #1. Now, I think I mentioned it last week that the previous Murder World story that was kind of like a longer form Murder World story was in a book called Avengers Arena, which was almost completely ripped off from the film Battle Royale. I think I talked about Battle Royale, or I mentioned it a bunch of times last week, but I don't think if you're not familiar with the movie Battle Royale, it's a very Lord of the Flies story. A bunch of Japanese kids, high school kids, get stranded on a desert island, and then it turns out that they had been stranded there by their teacher, whose name eludes me, but he's been in a million things. He's one of, like, especially back in the 90s and early aughts. Jesus, that's really going to bother me. You know what his name is. Callers, go ahead. The phone lines are open if you want to tell me who this actor is, because he was in a ton of stuff, and he was a comedian. Like, he hosted, I want to say, a variety show on Japanese television, but in all of his movies, he was like a hitman or something crazy like that. And in Battle Royale, he plays this teacher who, it becomes more Hunger Games at that point, where it becomes like a competition, and he's putting them in direct competition. And some of them, most of them get slaughtered right away, and some of them really take to it. And that was Avengers Arena. Even the logo for Avengers Arena was this circular, kind of looked like a travel stamp on a passport, which was very, very similar to the logo for Battle Royale, the film. So that was like 2012, I want to say. And then now, this current Murder World story is not going to rip off a Japanese story. It's going to rip off a Korean story. So this is basically Squid Game. It looks very much like Squid Game. And Arcade is instead of putting superheroes into Murder World, he's running it like a contest. So it's 200 people. Whoever is the last man standing wins the grand prize, which is, a fuckload of money and something like that. I don't have a problem with it. You want to go ahead and do a Squid Game in the Marvel Universe, that's fine. I liked Squid Game. It was one of the few, like, trendy shows that I was like, that looks interesting. And it was a good show. I don't know if you saw it. If I hadn't read it or hadn't seen it, I would have still enjoyed this. I just wouldn't have had that cultural comparison. But yeah, it's good. And it is a 5th week book, which is really strange because it came out in the middle of the month. There is 5 Wednesdays in the month of November 2022. And as I'm sure I've mentioned before, Marvel and DC used to, whenever there were 5 Wednesdays in a month, they would take that opportunity to do what's called a 5th week book, which is a mini series of 5 issues, one for each Wednesday. And it's just, sometimes, most of the time, in fact, I want to say, it's not in continuity. This, I think, is. Oh, no, I definitely know that it is. And, but, so, yeah, I thought it was just going to be 3, like that Curse of the Man thing they did a while ago. But it's Murder World Avengers, Murder World Spider-Man, Murder World Wolverine, looking forward to that, Murder World Moon Knight, and then Murder World Game Over, which is the final one. And it's written by Jim Zub and Ray Fox. Now, Ray Fox, I haven't heard his name in a while. When DC did their New 52 relaunch, that would have been like 2011, I started seeing his name pop up more. In fact, I remember I felt bad for the guy because there was a point around that time, I want to say 2012, 2013, where Gail Simone was kind of unceremoniously fired from writing Birds of Prey, which was an enormously popular book with an enormously popular writer, and the internet melted. Like, people were just insanely furious that they would fire Gail Simone, and the outcry was so great, in fact, that they did end up bringing her back, which is good. She's a tremendous writer. But I felt bad for Fox, because Fox was who was writing it after her, and it was like, and I saw, like, I don't think I saw anything from him on it, but I did see, like, I think Chuck Wendig, or some other writers who were kind of like, they weren't like defending him, but they were like, hey, you know, job's a job. I mean, we feel bad for the whole Gail Simone situation too, but the guy's got to eat. But so I haven't seen him much since then. It's also co-written by Jim Zub, and this is actually going to come up with the next book, because I think I mentioned Jim Zub before, whose work in the past I have not much cared for, but he is slowly sort of starting to win me over. And so is a writer named Mark Russell, who wrote Blade, Vampire Nation #1. Now, Dave Wachter does the art. I was already on board. Mark Russell has done... He did a bunch of series for Ahoy. And the one in particular... He did one that I really liked called Bronze Age Boogie. I'm pretty sure that was him anyway. And... right? Maybe not. He did one... I can't remember the name of this one now. But it was a space opera, but all the characters were cats, which was fine. And then he did one called Second Coming, which is about the second coming of Jesus. Like, what if Jesus was living here with us? And I was like, come on, man. It's been done a gajillion times. And they even did a second one. I mean, it must have been popular enough, I guess. And so I think that one book really colored me on his work ever since. And I've not read anything that he's done since then that I disliked as much as that. But he hasn't, you know, it's like he was kind of starting from less than zero. That's all over with now. This is one of the funnest comics I've read this year, for sure. It's basically a noir, private eye / western / vampire story. Vampire stories, I don't care. I'm bored with vampire stories. I was never a Buffy guy. The whole thing. I was in high school when Interview with the Vampire came out, and Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, featuring Herman Menderchuk, and I OD'd on all that goth shit immediately. I was like, dude, I mean, first of all, I'm only 14. I don't know what bi-curious means yet, but this is too much. This is just, ugh. And yeah, it was just a lot of, you know, I knew all these SCA kids in high school, and they were a bunch of wingnuts and dingbats. A couple of them were cool, and I was friends with. But even those guys were fucking dorks. I never hung out with them outside of school. Except the one time I did, and I was like so bored out of my fucking mind because they were all a bunch of goddamn D&D nerds. I have the day off tomorrow. Blade has never been that kind of vampire story, and so I do like Blade comics. But that's the other thing too. I went back, this would have been about 5 or 6 years ago, I want to say, and I read a bunch of the earliest Blade stories, and they were not good. I just remember they were very like, it was like an experimental thing, you know. They were trying to create horror stories in a market they never had been able to do. This is in the 70s when horror, kind of like vampires, were just being allowed again in comics, according to the Comics Code Authority. So they were trying to do like black and white magazines and, you know, that kind of shit that you would buy next, like trying to compete with heavy metal and magazines like that for a more mature audience. By mature, I mean jerking off. So yeah, this is just, I can't, this was just so good. It was such a great mix of those three genres. Somebody makes so there's, in the Marvel Universe, and I mentioned this last week, Chernobyl has been given over to the vampires, and it's now a country of its own called Vampirsk. And Dracula is the sovereign ruler of this nation. And the world at large, the superhero community, I guess you could say, have only agreed to recognize Vampirsk as a sovereign nation if Blade himself is like the sheriff, basically, of Vampire Town. And so he has to go out and find out who tried to kill Dracula. And it's just perfect. It's just so good. It's all kind of tough. I mean, Blade's just a tough guy. I don't know. I can't say it enough. I don't have to because I'm already almost out of time. Almost. How about 15 minutes ago? Okay. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours. Fuck Whitey. I don't know.